Jao, Chris, Brian, Con, everybody's happy? Good. Okay. So in the usual fashion, I will monitor the lobby and act as a co-host, I guess, with this session. And we're very delighted today to have the amazing Henry Tapper on the call, our chairman, and obviously he's decided to call this event the wash up. So no doubt you'll explain to us, Henry, what the wash up means. But obviously we now have the results of last week. We've got a number of questions already prepared for the audience, but obviously, as you'll know, with if you're a regular Playpen member, please raise a hand or put comments in the chat and challenge Henry or challenge the industry or challenge me. Yeah, raise a hand anytime if you want. We'll keep this as informal as we can. We are recording. So Henry, do you want to do a sort of brief introduction as to what today's all about and how important are pensions in the grand scheme of things? That's the first question I've got, but please fire questions over and raise a hand if you'd like. Henry, over to you.
Yeah, this is a general discussion, everyone. I mean, you just put your hand up and go. And I'm just got 10 points here, but there are another 20 points which could easily come up. I'll just run through and say a couple of things about each and pause, and then if anyone wants to jump in, then just shout. Steve alluded to my first question, which is how important are pensions in the overall scheme of things? And if you'd listened to the conversation which the nation had before the election, you'd say not very, because basically pensions was ducked, and probably quite rightly too. The public just want us to get on with it and provide them with pensions. They don't want to know all the nitty-gritty, which is the subject of the trade press. They want to know they get a good proper state pension, and that whatever they're saving for provides them with value for money when they get to retirement, and they leave the rest of it to us. So I put in my first contention is how important are pensions? Well, discussing them is not that important. How important are pensions to people in the overall scheme of things? Very. And we did see how emotive people got when there was talk about taxing the state pension, as if that was something that didn't happen in the first place. Any questions at this point before I move on to my second point or second question? Okay, yeah, Tom. Oh, it's nice to see you. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. I'm very well, thank you.
But they're rather more important to people than you would have thought, bearing in mind how we talked about them before the election.
Well, I sort of agree with you. There was a lot that should have been talked about in the election campaign that wasn't, and I think how the government deals with conversations that haven't been had is going to be really interesting. I guess my observation is, I agree with you. People aren't that interested in the mechanics of pensions. They are interested in the outcomes of pensions. Those in the know, whether you're working in the Treasury or the DWP or outside in the industry, know that there are some pretty intractable problems in delivering on those expectations. And those are the conversations that aren't being had and that do need to be had.
Thank you. Anyone else want to jump in at this point, or shall I move on? Okay. One thing we did get from the Labour Party before they got elected was that if elected, they would set up a review of workplace pensions, which I thought was probably a sensible compromise rather than going for the full hog, the pension commission type approach, review everything and start from first principles. They'd accept that we have got a system in play. What are we going to do with it? And this reminded me a little bit of what happened in 2010. We accepted that the Pension Schemes Act of 2008, whatever the Pensions Act of 2008, was going to make auto-enrolment happen unless somebody said nay. Yeah. And I guess there are a few things out there which are going to happen unless people say nay. And we'll come on to that in a second. But perhaps the thing that the pensions industry's picked up on as the most important thing about the workplace pension review is that they get more money to manage, to extract a rent from, and that people have more adequate pensions as a result of extra contributions. I think we're a world away from having consensus outside of the industry about whether increasing contributions, especially to those who are on low earnings, is a good thing. And I don't think it's a done deal that we're going to get the 2017 AE review implemented in full. But I'd be very interested in people's views on that, because that's my personal view, and it results from conversations with unions and others who may not be inside our particular tents, but are inside the government's. A hand is up there from View All. Oh, that's not me. Who's that? Who's got their hand up? Steve, come on.
Con Keating. Con,
right.
put your hand up, and then we'll come to Rosalind. So yeah, go on.
Con, yes. We'll have you and then Ros, yeah.
I have my hand up, Henry. Do we know who is actually going to make up the group conducting this review?
No, we don't. Yeah, we have no idea at all. We don't know who the pensions minister is going to be. We don't know who is going to be in charge of the Work and Pensions Committee, but suspect it's probably not going to be Stephen Timms, because he has become a minister of state in the DWP. Could well be the next pensions minister, but we don't know for sure. And we've no idea who constitutes it. I mean, my guess is that there are some bright people who've come into the firmament, including this man, who are quite likely to want to be a part of that workplace pension review, just because they're that kind of person. But we don't know is the answer.
So it's still pie in the sky.
Well, it's a manifesto promise that we're going to get one of these things. So I don't think that's. I think Rachel Reeves was pretty clear that they're going to keep their promises. But what comes out of it is very much dependent on who goes on it. Brian's put his hand up and said perhaps Liz Kendall, and Liz is the new Secretary of State for the Department of Work and Pensions, and she's certainly a candidate. But all is idle speculation at the moment. Rosalind, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I just sort of concur that I really disappointingly don't think that it's a done deal about increased contributions on auto enrolment, simply because at the moment everyone's so extremely sensitive of the risk of cost to businesses, and there'll be plenty of other costs to businesses which were much higher in the manifesto, if you like, or in political in political discourse. So in a way, I think we probably are going to need this pensions review for someone to say, oh my goodness, we really have to do something about this, because I think there isn't the political will to do what we all know needs to be done with auto enrolment contributions, or what most of us think needs to be done with auto enrolment contributions. So I disappointingly don't think anything's going to happen there.
Well, I think there's scope for quite a lot of thinking about how they actually get there. I mean, there's the blunt tool of the mandatory levels. Yeah, and there's a rather less blunt tool which is used in America of sort of incentivization. So they have a sort of idea of perhaps allowing managers greater freedom with their own pensions if they get high levels of participation in the pension scheme or whatever it might be. So there are lots of ways of doing this, and a lot of them haven't really been explored. And if you're going to give this workplace pension review scope to do some thinking, then I'd hope that they did some thinking beyond, it's the binary, we either do the AE review or we don't. There are bits of it that might do, bits of it they might not do. And you mentioned cost of business, but of course, if you're a Labour politician, you're also thinking about the cost of living, which is even more an acute issue if you're worried about whether or not you can pay the grocery bill at the end of the week. So yes, it's a far from a done deal, is the general feeling. I'll stop again before I move on. Okay.
I think Brian Gannon's just made a comment in the chat regarding removing the band earnings below 6240, so that all earnings are subject to 3+5. Is that potentially on the cards, Henry, do we think, or not?
Well, I mean, that's the pound one is one of the 2017 AE review commitments, isn't it? Do I remember rightly? So
yeah, but it's 2024, and we now got a Labour government. So
well, yeah, they always said they were going to implement these in the middle of the next decade. We are now in 2024, given 2 years, and they're still in the middle. yeah, rather than the ends. So I think it's still possible to meet the manifesto pledge, albeit of another government. But there is no manifesto pledge by the Labour Party to include the 2017 AE review weeks. I think that point has been made by David. David Robbins on the call. I think he made that very forcibly on Twitter, early stage, and it stuck with me. So, is it going to happen? Well, if you were on £15,000 a year and you were suddenly finding that you were having to pay 1% of the first £6,000 you earn as an extra pension contribution, you might balk at that. On the other hand, if you were finding that you were starting to get pension windfalls next summer as a result of overpaying on your pensions, which is what's going to happen, although no one's been talking about that, you might well think now is quite a good time to increase my pension contributions, because effectively it's I win with one hand and I lose with another. So you could, there are all kinds of timing issues which come in. I hope people understand what I mean by pension windfalls in the new year, 2025. Anyone wants me to expand on that, it's fine, but it's to do with a net pay anomaly, which is unwinding for those people in net pay schemes, which is everybody in the public sector, plus a high proportion of the people in the private sector who make contributions to DB and DC schemes, most of them to DC schemes, who pay under net pay. The exceptions are people who pay to places like Nest, People's Pension, and to group personal pensions, where they pay under the relief source arrangement. And that's something that the Conservative Party didn't make much of a play of, but they actually, on this at least, meet their manifesto pledge. In 2019, they said they were going to sort out the net pay anomaly. They have done, albeit it will be 6 years afterwards, and it won't be backdated. So you'll only get your 2024 rebate because you overpaid you won't get all the rebates on the money that you potentially could have overpaid since 2014, which is a chiz, a word which I haven't used since I was about 7, but which I think is rather good. Anyone else use the word chiz? No, it's a bit mean. Okay.
Molesworth was a user of the term chiz, I seem to recall.
It was indeed Molesworth. It was the sort of thing you said at prep school, if you went to such a thing, which I did for my sins, and you used to say chiz a lot. Okay, I am going to move on because this is a bit of a distraction. I've got a lot of things to get through. The unions are rather more important than we think they are. Yeah. If you notice, one of the manifesto pledges was actually to sort out an issue with the mine workers. Yeah. An issue that nobody other than the mine workers knew we had. Yeah. Well, that's because the unions actually do have a say in how these things run. And we don't have the union people on these calls very much because the private sector doesn't talk to the unions as they used to. But they are very, very, very vocal about pensions, about things like state pension age, yeah, which is a big bugbear. They are very vocal about auto-enrollment rates, which they have said should go up, please say. But they are also very vocal in their disgruntlement, yeah, with the way in which DB pensions have been sort of put to one side, and I think that we can expect them to be quite supportive of a return to a pension culture, whether that be a DB culture, which is unlikely unless you are a keen supporter of pension superhaven, which I will not speak a lot about, which you all know about, or if you are into CDC, and CDC is an obvious way back, as far as the unions are concerned, into collective pension provision. I am pleased to see the CWU tweeting this morning that from October the 10th, I think it was, there will be a Royal Mail CDC scheme. I haven't seen anything as definitive as that on Twitter or anywhere else for that matter. So I think we can be reasonably sure that, deferred as it has been many a time, for all the reasons which have been well documented, the CDC scheme for the Royal Mail will go ahead under Labour, and that will be in place by October this year, albeit 6 years after the original idea was cast by my good friend Hilary Sol, Derek Penstead, made on the call, Terry Pullinger, Simon Eagle, and All Points North. So well done them. Okay, so how important are the unions? I think they'll be considerably more important than they were, but rather less important than they'd like to be. Anyone like to I mean, there are some important people on the Labour sort of policy groups on this call, so some of them may want to shout. No, that's a. Okay.
There's talk in the chat about potentially means testing, but is that going to happen, Henry, or not?
No, means tested state pensions are not going to happen. Full stop. I think it absolutely, totally unlikely. But if anyone wants to contravene what I'm saying, that's fine, but I don't see it happening. We have a means tested pension credit system, which works reasonably well. We are not going to have a means tested state pension. Does anyone disagree with me? Who is I don't? I wish to echo what Henry says. I like that, Brian. Thank you. Okay.
You heard it first on Playpen. There you go.
What's going to get thrown out of the balloon? There are an awful lot of consultations outstanding, aren't there? You know, we've got consultations outstanding on the pension. Well, I assume there's a consultation outstanding on some aspect of the pension dashboard. That there always is. It's either the FCA or TPR or PADA or somebody, PASA or somebody or other's got a consultation outstanding. Will we get a pension dashboard? I suspect we will do. Will we get it in a timely fashion? No, we won't, because we should have had it already. When we get it, it will be a great boon to everybody. The sooner the better, in my personal opinion, but that is only a personal opinion. As far as the government is concerned, they have not got a particularly strong view on it. Yeah, I haven't heard anybody in the Labour Party talking about the pensions dashboard as an issue at all. Has anybody? It's just rumbling along, and it's got a new CEO and it's got this and it's got that and it will deliver on whatever. I think there is a big question, and you know, I don't want to spike anyone's guns here, but you know, I think there's a big question about the whole MAPS regime, which is going to continue to rumble on. Are we getting value for money from MAPS? Are we getting is the pension wise thing working properly and all that sort of stuff? And that's all going to get rolled into the workplace pension review, as will be the dashboard. But frankly, do I see any of it thrown out the balloon? No. Yeah. I do see some things not happening. I mean, they can't go with pot follows member and go with lifetime pot. I mean, they've got to make a choice of one of those two. I was at an event recently, which I think Tom may have been at, where Jill Furness, who was the last person who stuck her hand up to do the pensions job in the Labour Party, was. And they were discussing, it was Michael Johnson discussing, you know, lifetime pot, and somebody else discussing pot follows member. And I think by the end of it, we all got totally confused about which one's best. But you've got to go for one or the other. You can't go for both. Hand up from Tom McPhail.
Oh, sorry, Henry. Thank you for that, and apologies if I'm sort of interrupting your flow. Because
no, because you are more than experts on pot follows member than anyone else.
Well, I mean, my only observation on that front is someone's got to make a choice, right? We can't carry on as we are, and the sort of mad proliferation like rabbits of the small pots needs to be capped off. And so, yeah, I mean, I think you're right. Those are the current two choices on the table. I desperately hope the government makes a choice, one way or the other, on how we resolve that. And personally, I'd be an advocate of the lifetime provider. But so there's that. I actually, the reason I put my hand up was two other things that you may have been going to come on to. So apologies for preempting you. One is value for money, which is one of those consultations which is outstanding at the moment, which I suspect might get delayed because I think there will be more of a shift towards the productive finance agenda and how that feeds into value for money. And the other one is the pension freedoms and the default decumulation work that's currently going on with DWP. And I have a fairly strong expectation that this government will take another look at pension freedoms and put some more robust guardrails around that, and that will tie in with the default decumulation work. That was it.
Yeah, I think with the value for money thing is one of the things that I do think might well get thrown out the balloon, because the government might well say, look, there's an awful lot of work. to get that thing properly in place. And frankly, it's up to the industry to get it sorted out. It's not sort of intervention that we really want to do as government. We've got better things to do. I can see that happening, because there is an awful lot of work to be done on that. And the government may well say, well, you had your chance, you never saw it through, so just get on, do some other things. So I see it as vulnerable, let's say, vulnerable. The other thing that you mentioned was
pension freedoms and decumulation.
The whole decumulation thing has to get sorted. Yeah, it is simply not good enough having a workplace pension system where there isn't a pension at the end of it. Yeah, that to me is clear.
Just on that front, look at Labour paper back in February this year, I think it was, where they talked as one of their policy objectives as being sustainable retirement incomes. That wasn't adequacy of savings, that wasn't retirement pots, it was sustainable retirement incomes. Now, I think that's your point there, Henry, that it's not actually about the accumulation of the DC pot, it's about the retirement income.
Yes, absolutely, because we give these tax reliefs for something, and it's to protect people from living too long and running out of money. That's a fundamental of this whole thing, and we're not doing that at the moment. We're giving people the freedom to blow it all on the Lamborghini, which they don't do, or over hoard, which they do. We know the same problem in Australia. Retirement income covenant's been trying to get to the bottom of this. Industry, reluctant players, and they're not very keen about turning pots to pensions. Why should they? They're making their money on the pots, and so it goes on. If we're going to be bold, I would expect that the Workplace Pension Review will do something about this. And I was encouraged by the pension regulator's comments yesterday, where they talked about innovation in the retirement space in a way which they weren't talking about it previously. So yes, I do think this is going to be a key battleground in the next 3 or 4 years. How do we actually manage the post-retirement income situation in such a way that people don't run out of money and do have the capacity to stay solvent in later age? Very, very difficult problem. And not one easily sorted. Oh, those are hands up there now. Shall we come to Rosalind? Is your number one, Rosalind?
Yes, it was just, sorry to take you back to something where you said, I don't think much will change, which is dashboard.
Yes.
I'd be intrigued on your thoughts on, it seems to be, one of the problems with dashboard, of course, is that the timing all fell out quite badly. And then we've ended up in this slightly difficult situation where the legislation no longer gives you a staging date. You just have to have regard to guidance, which I can tell you legally doesn't get you very far at all. And that's partly because it all got pushed close together. And it struck me that one of the advantages of simply being a different political party means that Labour can come in and say that was all a disaster that the Tories did, and therefore we want to do this, but we're going to push all the dates out and put in new dates and put them back into legislation and have it run smoothly because it's Labour now, in a way that obviously the Tories couldn't do. They had to say, oh yes, it's all going fine. So
that's what Laura Trott did, isn't it, Rosalind? Laura Trott said, take one look at this. It's an absolute fiasco, accident waiting to happen. We'll push it all back. And yes, the Labour Party might well say this is our inheritance and not our watch. This is all the Tories' fault. And it could well be 2028. And then I'll have won my bet, which is that I will actually see my state pension in play before the dashboard comes along. I made that bet in 2020 with the MAPS CEO. He said, don't be so ridiculous. I still think I'm odds on a winner on it. But,
how much money do you have on that, Henry?
I think it was 1,001 he gave me. And I think it was £1. So wherever he is, down in Cornwall somewhere, I'll chase him down. I'll chase him down. Okay. Ben, it's always nice to see you on the call. Ben, how are you?
Very well, Henry. Nice to see you.
Yeah.
Betting is always a precarious business, but especially in proximity to a general election. So be careful there, people.
I'm the right side of the general election.
You are the right side, of course you are. We're in that position now, aren't we, where a new pensions minister will shortly be appointed, and what often happens is the folder is opened and the enormous pensions elephant there is to terrify the new occupant at Caxton's house, and the question there then is how to break down that elephant into consumable pieces. One thing that you mentioned earlier on, Henry, was you mentioned pensions wise and its effectiveness, and you know I've discussed this before, but of the things that are found to work from analysis of the people who've came into contact, the user analysis of pensions wise is really good. You know, people overwhelmingly, when tested on factual pieces of information about their options for pensions, it clearly puts people in a better position than they were previously. Certainly not, they might not be optimal, but they're in a better position than they were before. And one thing that I was keen to get your view on, and perhaps open a discussion on the call on, is this is one thing that could be done relatively quickly, because we've got a service here that's been proven to deliver good, help people to understand their basic options for access, but there's not been any effort to try and make sure that the people who are likely to need it most get there. And it seems like one thing that could be fixed and should be fixed, given that when's the earliest point we're actually going to see pensions dashboards? Some point in 2027. Well, there's hundreds of thousands of people who are going to access their DC pots in that period. So what could we do to try and make sure that people get to these services when it's most helpful for them to do that? I'd be interested in your thoughts, and then indeed interested in others on the call.
Well, my thoughts are this. First of all, the counterfactual is that most people can read. Yeah. So do they actually need to go to PensionWise when they can actually look at their options and check them out?
Can I just come back to you briefly on that? You're absolutely right, but that whether they won't want to read is a different thing. There's the motivation question, which is, I think, is the problem. Are people inclined to learn stuff? Well, yes, of course they are. 9 out of 10 cats will tell you that. But it's the actual activation gap that we have. Yeah.
Okay. So the question is, do they voluntarily want to read something, or do they voluntarily want to sign up to a meeting with PensionsWise? And I know what you're going to say. They're going to say you can't have your money until you speak to PensionWise. I know that's
no, that wouldn't be a fair characterisation of my view on this. But
you are keen on a more mandatory sort of interview type approach, yeah?
Well, I have to challenge that. Not keen on mandatory. An opt-out would be a good idea on the same basis of auto-enrollment, right, but definitely not mandatory.
So anyway, we can go. My big answer to this is that you can strong nudge as long as you like, yeah. But people get really pissed off if they have to do something. And Brian's on the call, and people do get pissed off and they go off down to MAPS for their red and amber flag meetings and so on to do their transfers and so on. We seem to want to put quite a lot of pressure on MAPS to be the kind of the source of all wisdom when it comes to these things. I personally feel that what people want is something that's done for them, and that they opt out of defaults rather than opt into investment pathways, which is the current system that we've adopted. So I think the system is putting too much responsibility on individuals to make decisions they can't take, and I think that PensionWise has put in the individual's position of giving people 40 minutes worth of information, so they come away with that reasonably familiar with what the choices are, but then still have great difficulty in working out which of them they should take.
97% of them say they would recommend the experience to people.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a lovely thing. But I don't think it makes for brilliant decision making all the same. But I mean, we'll beg to differ on this one, because I know we do, Ben, and we have done for the last 10 years, and we're not going to clear this up on the call. But I am a strong believer in strong defaults, and I like the idea of targeted support. And if MAPS can give targeted support to help people with the decisions they're trying to take and basically give them validation on those decisions, I think that's brilliant. That's the way I'd like to see it done. Gareth. Sorry, Brian. Brian first.
Brian.
Yeah, no, sorry, Gareth. Hi. Actually, a question for Tom, because I think it was a couple of years ago, Tom did a review on PensionWise and MAPS generally. I'd just be interested. I think one of the things Tom said, I may be wrong, but I think he said, is PensionWise fit for purpose? I'd just be interested to hear perhaps a little potted summary of what he meant by that.
Okay, yeah, I'll answer that one. Thank you, Brian. So yes, I did. I did a review of maps for the DWP. I mean, it wasn't specifically looking at pension-wise. I I'll cut them some slack. It was at a particular time when the different entities had recently merged. They'd been through quite a turbulent period with their senior management team. But what I found was an organisation that was punching significantly below its weight. And I would actually argue that's still the case. I mean, one of my colleagues has recently done a report on the advice gap. One of the things that came out of that is no one's heard of MAPS. And I mean, it's really interesting. I think it was Tony Hobman, when he was in charge, poured vast sums of money into trying to raise the profile of what was then the Money Advice Service, and to no discernible effect, and got sacked for his efforts because it was very ineffective. And that was to try and address this problem that I've just highlighted, which is that no one knows these services exist. And I'm sure Ben would want to come into that, but I'm going to keep talking for a moment. So the problem they've got is, as has been pointed out, when people have pension-wise service, it's good and it works and they're happy. The problem is vast numbers of people are not going to pension-wise, and the evidence suggests they don't want to either. And even, and no one knows it exists, which is why I just posted in the chat, my solution to the pension-wise thing, my recommendation in the report was, you should reverse pension-wise back into the pension providers, and do some kind of licensed guidance service at the point where the customers actually are, rather than trying to force the customers to go somewhere else to get their guidance. That was a slightly.
You better tell us what AGBR is, because that's
the Advice Guidance Boundary Review currently being conducted by the FCA to look at how targeted support could be delivered by financial institutions. The issue with the AGBR is, I mean, I think it has potential to do some good, as has been pointed out. It's the FCA, so will it actually achieve anything? But also the risk with the AGBR, the guidance review, is if you deliver more comprehensive guidance from the pension companies, the institutions, the master trusts, the platforms, wherever, you undermine competition, and so there is a trade-off there that needs to be considered. Anyway, I'll pause there.
Okay, and look, Gareth, quickly, because we want to move on from this bloody advice guidance boundary review.
Yeah, two things, Henry. Then. Two things, if I may. First is your comment that everybody can read, and pretty much everybody probably can read. Whether they can read well enough is the big issue. But I've just been reading the Plain Numbers report this morning, which is kind of the equivalent of the Plain English campaign, and that has some hugely impressive examples and some hugely kind of worrying discussion around understanding of numbers and the way in which you present them. But the second thing is pension-wise. I have a long-standing criticism of pension-wise, in that it just doesn't go enough. I mean, fine, people who use it like it, and it may be great for very generic guidance. But what it should be doing is using the real personal individual's numbers and telling them the consequences of the choices. Nothing to do with products, nothing to do with those kind of choices, nothing regulated. But the ability to say to somebody, well, okay, if you take this amount as capital and draw down, or this amount as income, this will be the effect on, from my particular perspective, your means tested benefits and so on. Those are the really important choices that people need to make. And you can't make those choices without knowing what your own numbers are.
That's well put. And I would advise people to read Porrig's excellent comments, which puts it the other way around, and that's in there. And Brian Gannon, who's come through, and comments on that, because but I am going to move on, because we've only got 20 odd minutes left, and I want to get to some meaty subjects which aren't necessarily about savers and whatever, but about the way we organise the pension system. We've talked about what might get thrown out of the balloon. All kinds of things could get thrown out of the balloon, including maps, but I think that they're, by and large, the infrastructure is there to stay. That would be my definitive comment on that. And the dashboard's here to stay. Do we still need a DB funding code? I think we've been asking this question for the last 5 years, haven't we, John? Con, and we've been coming to the same conclusion, which is that the DB funding code has caused more trouble than just about anything else, not least to the pension regulator, but to the DWP, to the FCA, to the PRA, and most of all, to the whole pensions industry, who've been trying to implement what is effectively a moving target, which moves every time that the gilt rate seems to move. You know, we just can't get any consistency about what the DB funding code is supposed to do. And my contention on this is that we ought to have a common purpose about what we're doing with pension schemes. And that should be the same for DB and DEC. And we should be just thinking about how we make sure that we have everyone, getting a dignified retirement by having a proper pension in it. And that means encouraging more and more pension provision, rather than getting completely strung up about a decreasingly small part of the pension system, which seems to take a disproportionate amount of our time thinking about it. I very much favour some of the ideas that have been coming out of the Keating-Clacker camp over the years, like the idea of a car. And I don't know if Com would like to comment on this, but to have some kind of uniform funding rate, which we also stick to, seems to be very much around the common purpose. Whether or not it's too late to implement that, I don't know. But Con, do you want to say something? Because you sent me a really interesting paper about pension funding and about investment. I know it wasn't specifically about this, but it would be really interesting to hear from you.
No, that well, I'll be sending you a later version of that piece. That, as I said to you, is first draft. So there is, in order to check the honesty of my reviewer.
Would you just like to sum up the key argument? I think
look, the key argument against the DB funding code, or the new DB funding code, is that it's going to cost us somewhere between 150 and 200 billion of additional contributions. The new DB funding code is going to push everyone to low dependency funding levels, and they are a lot higher than technical provisions or anything we've seen so far. The impact assessment which accompanied the legislation, the DWP sponsored legislation, was done by TPR, and it's based on TPR's asset numbers, and those asset numbers are simply wrong. They're wrong by something of the order of 279 billion pounds. In other words, they think the number is 1.1 trillion in DB schemes, whereas, ONS thinks it's 1.1 trillion, and they do quarterly surveys, so they're likely to be accurate. Whereas pensions regulator thinks that number is 1.5 trillion as at the end of December. That means, and their zero cost to the new legislation is based on a figure that is out by that much. Now, if Labour can't see that the cost of putting another 150, 200 billion into DB schemes comes with a huge tax cost of 30 or 40 billion, they have to be blind. And we have pointed it out to them that, so what do you do with the DB funding code? Nothing, you just don't publish it.
Ditch it. Ditch it, and what do you do instead of getting everyone to comply with DB funding code because you haven't published it?
It's sufficient to say, what you should be doing is what was actually originally envisaged in the 2004 Act, which is fund to the level of technical provisions. Okay. There are perhaps 200 schemes in DB world. which can't currently meet that technical provisions funding level. It's really a very, very small number indeed.
200 out of 5,000.
Yeah, and I mean, the total value of those schemes is maybe £3.5 billion. It's nothing.
Well, I'm coming to you from the offices of the Pension Super Fund, and I can tell you that this is exactly what we found, that actually the vast majority of pension schemes,
Yeah.
if they have a problem, is what to do with their surplus at the moment, not to worry about funding. And I mean, that's a very bizarre.
I don't think it's the vast majority, Henry. It's about 54% that are funded. Well, yeah, we can talk about
sorry,
that.
The vast majority of schemes that come to us, Scott.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So it is a more pressing problem for pension schemes right now to know what to do with the surplus money than to know how to keep their.
I mean, the key criticism against enforcing the DB funding code is really very simple. It's 150 billion to 200 billion being drawn out of corporate sector mainly, because most of the scheme sponsors are corporations. That's money which is no longer available for long-term investment, for productive investment.
Yeah.
It runs completely counter to the productive investment and growth formula that Rachel Reeves is so keen on.
Absolutely right, and that's that is very much of the moment. Hands up, Steve. Help me out here. Porrick, you've got a hand up.
Porrick's got a hand up. Yeah.
Yeah, Porrick, get off your mute. Give us your tops.
No, sorry. I was just trying to take my raised hand down because we've moved on from a point I wanted to make. So carry on.
Oh, okay. I will carry on because I was going to talk about it. Rachel Reeves is going today be talking about this national funds, which she wants to set up as a sovereign wealth fund for everything. And we don't know the detail yet. Nick Lyons has been very much involved in this. And I expect that the likes of Andy Briggs and so on like that have as well. The insurers probably have a big say. I'd be very interested in views generally about whether we need this national pension fund or national fund, wealth funds, which she's talking about. I'm going to see you got your hand up again, Con. Do you want us to say something about this?
Yeah, there are actually two funds that Labour are proposing. There's a national wealth fund, which is going to have 7.3 billion quid of capital. And there's Great Britain Energy, which is going to be our windmills and so on financier. And that's going to have 8.3 billion of capital. Now, my question is really a very simple one. Where does that money come from? Ordinarily, if you're creating a sovereign wealth fund, you have excess funds from oil or whatever, oil being the usual form, or trade more generally if you're China. But it seems to me that that money has to actually be coming from yet more government borrowing. And I'm not convinced that that is at all a good idea.
Well, you cover the pension protection funds. It could come from Nest, and these are.
Well, actually, it can't come from the pension protection fund. Yeah, the pension protection fund surplus is there for pensions.
Yeah, but I mean, it can participate in a national fund, energy fund, if that fund provides returns that pay pensions. Surely, I mean, we wait to see the details. Yeah, but. And we won't have to wait for very long because I think she's talking about it as we speak. But clearly, Rachel Reeves has got it in her head that because the cupboard is bare in other respects, it will be the pension funds that she will be trying to tap to do a lot of the infrastructure work which is needed, whether that be energy, whether that be housing, whether it be whatever. Yeah. And venture capital is very much a part of this, small startup, scale up. Getting people to the point at which they list and encouraging people to list in the UK as opposed to other countries. All of this is.
Let me just make
Yeah.
Let me just make a point, Henry, in that note that I showed to you, which is really the very important one. If you're talking about new investment, you are actually looking at new money, new savings.
Yep.
Unless you're going to go and borrow.
Plenty of that going on.
Sorry?
Also, plenty of that going on.
Yeah, well, there's 254 billion of gilt issuance to be financed in the current year, and close to that figure again next year. It's not clear where that money's going to come from. I don't see foreigners being kind to us to that extent, to be
There's
perfectly frank.
insurance companies getting involved, and yeah,
not to those numbers. Henry, I mean, if you look at the pensions world, then DB pensions basically are producing no new cash, no new money.
DC pensions are cash flow rich.
Yeah, DB private and public sector DB have an excess of about 9, close to 10 billion annually. That's how much they have available for new investment. The real savings are all in auto enrollment and private sector DC, and that's a total of about 37 billion, of which about 24 billion is actually employer contributions. Now that can be productively invested, but most of the investments you're talking about are not going to give you the sort of daily pricing or flexibility that people have got used to in pensions world. It also implies far less choice on the part of DC savers than they are accustomed to.
That's a lot of DC savers are going to have loads of choice. They have too much choice. They're spoiled for choice. And actually, there are lots of ways of unitizing funds which are only valued quarterly. And you know, and I know that the pensions industry is quite adept at getting around those kind of problems. I don't think that's the big issue. I think the big issue is one of trusteeship, which is concerned. Yeah, they are concerned about what they're doing, getting whipped by everyone, especially the pension regulator and so on. I think I understand your DB issues. I think getting money into growth into DB, getting money into private assets and illiquids on the DC side should be a piece.
It seems to me, Henry, you're trying to have your cake and eat it. On the one hand, you're saying that these funds can actually capitalize this wealth fund, and also the wealth fund and the GB Energy Fund. Sorry about that. I've got a phone going off here. And yet the whole purpose of those funds is to encourage those schemes to invest alongside the wealth funds in productive assets. Well, you can't have them on both sides of the equation.
No, I take that point. Okay.
Can we move on, Henry? Can we move on?
We will move on, because the abstruse area is very important for us to actually continue to think about workplace pensions, not just as DC, but as DB as well, because a lot of people depend on DB pensions. And frankly, one of the things that worries me most is the lack of innovation going on in DB pensions. And I won't go on about capital back journey plans, but I will say that schemes have gone into the PPF in the last 12 months, which shouldn't have done, because of the lack of innovation, because of trustee timidity, and because of a pension regulator that really isn't doing its stuff and is reinforcing the quietest graveyard rather than trying to get us out of it. And that brings me to perhaps my most contentious point of this, which is I really do think that the pension regulator has got to change. It has got to change. And Rachel Reeves was saying yesterday that she expected to see changes in pensions and by implication changes in pension regulation. Because right now, the pension regulator is doing a bad job in making the productive finance agenda work, not a good job. And I think Con and I are in agreement on that. Secondly, we are not getting pensions, we are getting pots. And thirdly, we are massively behind the game relative to our world peers in getting our DC funds invested in a productive way. In short, we are slamming huge amounts of money into gilts, in lifestyle programs, and even more money into the S&P 500, which seems to be the favored place for most of the defaults, which best invest on fixed weight, capital, global weight, whatever it is thing, equity funds. That's me showing my total ignorance of how to explain investment strategy to people. But I mean, I do think that we are way off the pace, and that goes for UK listed investment as well. I think we've done a bad job of promoting FTSE 250 investment companies, investment trusts as they're known, and so on. We need whole change, not just at the pension regulator, but we need the FCA to step up to the mark on a lot of this cost disclosure stuff, especially around investment trusts, with absolute mess. And I know that the Labour government are looking at this issue, and they ain't going to allow the regulators the kind of slack which they've had over the last 10 or 15 years, where frankly they haven't done their job properly. Here with Robin Ellison, absolutely. I also think there's about 400 or 500 people too many down in Brighton right now. The FCA did a cull a few years ago. We're still waiting for that to happen to Brighton. I would like to see heads roll in the regulator and to see a leaner, sharper, less expensive regulator, more focused on growth and less focused on managing the quietest graveyard. So that's my little done. Yeah. And Porrick, you got your hand up again. Okay, I do want to hear from you, Porrick. Yeah.
Go on, Porrick.
No, you don't, Henry. Because I'm trying to take it down, and it wouldn't.
No, you failed, mate. You failed. Can I get you?
Yeah.
What are you going to say? All right. We'll
no, honestly, I don't wish to contribute on that.
All right, that's fine. Tom.
Keep it clean. Keep it clean.
Tom.
Yeah, look, just Henry, just quickly, I absolutely agree with you. The angle I'd come at it from was the convergent evolution of DC pensions. You know, this bonkers world where we've got TPR regulating DC pensions in one way, FCA regulating DC pensions in a similar but slightly different way, and both really treading on each other's toes. And that element of the architecture is just bonkers now. So you know, for that reason alone, I would have argued for regulatory reform. But all your other points, I absolutely agree with as well.
All right. And I know we've got members of the pension regulator on the call, and they are friends of mine, and I don't in any way want to see them done that on this. But frankly, we have got an OTS regulator at the moment, and it does need to slim down a little bit and become better value for money for the public and energize itself in the right way. So sorry, pension regulator, if I'm being nasty to you, but I think you know it's for your own good. Okay.
Rosalind's got a hand up. Henry, let's hear Rosalind, and then
Rosalind, yeah, hello.
Hello. I would say on the regulator, to me, the biggest problem is that it is very unclear what their role is, and fundamentally, very often it seemed to me that their role has been to blame every time something goes wrong, and the effect of that is that the behaviour has become increasingly cautious and nervous and freaked out about things, rather than, as you say, sort of trying to be proactive in getting out there and moving forward. Although I do think there are areas they have done that quite well. I do just wonder if we're going to do something about the challenges with the regulator, it involves a grown-up conversation about what it is we expect them actually to achieve, rather than to expect them to be to blame each time things go wrong, which just doesn't seem to be very fair or helpful.
Yeah, agree with you there, Rosalind. And thanks for sticking up for the regulator, because somebody has to. Okay, so I'm nearly at the end of my long list of things that I'm interested in talking about. And just to conclude on that, should the pension regulator be worried in the new environment? Yes, it should. Should it look to its mettle? Yes, it should. It should up its game. very much so. Okay. Pension taxes. Okay, my last big point before we just wrap up with who's the next pensions minister. Pension taxation. I think there are three big things out there. There's what the IFAs are worried about, which is the LTA, and the return thereof. They shouldn't be so worried about the LTA. The second thing they should be much more worried about is the abolition, if you like, of the inheritance tax-free nature of pension pots prior to 75. And the still very tax advantage situation of pots after 75. I've noticed Torsten Bell talking about this, Paul Johnson, the IFS, talking about this. The Labour government has got to ask itself why it is giving this huge tax break on wealth management when the point of pensions is not to pass them on to the next generation, but to actually spend the pensions, get the money back into the economy, and making sure that people at the end of the day have money which they can, spend, in a productive fashion. That's what pensions are about. It is not a means of cascading wealth between the generations. Or that's what they've become, and certainly what they are for the wealth managers. So I expect to see that as a big bone of contention over the next couple of years, the inheritability of pensions. And then there's the wider question about whether or not we should reform the way in which contributions are taxed or get tax relief. Well, we've done a little bit of work on that already with the RAS thing, but it's tinkering at the edges. Is there going to be a wholesale reform of pension taxation? Well, I see David Robbins here swinging on his chair and smiling smugly because he probably knows the answer to this, but frankly, I don't know if there is an answer. I just think it's too hard. It was too hard for George Osborne and whatever, and I think it's going to be too damn hard for this government. I think that they're going to duck it and they're going to go for the inheritance. That's my personal view. Anyone want to put their hand up and say I'm wrong? Come on.
David has.
Well, I'm not putting my hand up to say you're wrong, Henry. Just to kind of, I agree with you. It seems to me more likely than not that they won't change the way that tax-free contributions work, because although Rachel Reeves made some very strong comments before becoming Shadow Chancellor to the effect that 40% tax relief was, she said it cannot be right at one point and was in urgent need of attention. Nothing that she said then got into the issue of how you would deal with delivering equivalent treatment for employer pension contributions or for employer finance DB accrual, which is obviously a massive issue with the public sector. And so it seems to me there's not a fully fleshed out plan there. No doubt, if she asked the Treasury to prepare options, they looked at it for Osborne, as you said, with various papers which can be dusted down. It's not necessarily impossible, but it's a lot easier to talk about than it is to do. And I suspect that other ways we might find it easier to go about getting money out of the system.
Yeah. Okay. So in the absence of any other voices on this, the Robbins Tapper axis is we will not see a radical change in the way in which pension contributions are taxed in this government. Income tax is a really difficult issue. Wealth taxes are much easier. Yeah. And if you regard pensions as wealth, expect to be taxed. That would be my conclusion on that. Yeah. Which brings us to the witching hour of 11:30 when we wrap up. But I would be interested if an announcement has been made as to who the new pensions minister is while I've been talking. I think the general view is the odds-on favourite in running is Stephen Timms, who has been made a work and pensions minister yesterday and has done the job before and looks very well primed to do the job in the future, in which case we will find somebody who's hitting the ground running. We will not have to do a 2-year education plan. It may well be that we get us a left fielder. I'd love to see Torsten do the job. That would be absolutely fantastic. But I'd very much like to see Stephen do the job for that matter. I do hope we don't get some complete wet behind the ears new starter who's put his hand up and said, or her hand up and said, I'll do pensions, and we have to wait until about 2028 before they actually do anything That's just a personal view, but might be shared by anyone. Anyone got their hand up at this stage? No. Right. Well,
No,
if that's
it's all
the
good.
case, let me shut up. I've spoken too long. Steve,
Henry,
back to you.
Henry, no, fantastic. On behalf of everybody, I think it's a great session. Thanks for everybody's input and questions, Con and Tom and David and Brian. Excellent. We could probably do another session like this very, very soon. There's so much to talk about and so much to debate. But yeah, let's see who's going to be the next pensions minister, and that'll be an interesting one. So,
oh no, here we are. Leslie Titcombe, delighted to see Stephen Timms back as a minister at DWP. Oh no, sorry, he's back as minister at DWP. Forget I spoke. We still don't know. We still don't know. I thought the great Leslie Titcombe, former regulator.
oh, Henry, you are a betting man. Go and put your bet on, Henry. Come on, there must be a bet somewhere.
Steve Webb.
Coral Bet 365. Come on, Henry, go and put
there isn't a market on it. Unbelievably, there is no market on who the next pensions minister will be. Try as I might to get my money on Timms, I can't.
There you go. There you go.
Okay. All right.
Well, on that note, Henry, I'm going to say thank you very much for your presentation. Thanks for everybody's input. Fantastic session. And we look forward to seeing you all again on the next Playpen session. Let's pray for peace in the East, peace in the Middle East. And I hope you all enjoy the rest of your days. And let's hope the pensions industry, let's, do something about this. Let's keep pushing, talking, debating, and changing. That's what we need, change. Right. So there you go.
Thank you very much.
All right. Cheers, everyone. Thanks a lot. Take care. Cheers. Bye.